What's up, guys? It's Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com. We have Miss Spidey here, who's being an absolute doll. She is my Chilean rose hair, and I'm hoping she's gonna move for you. Today, I wanted to talk about how do you know that you have an addiction to tarantulas? And this isn't something that's normally on my mind because it's not something that I worry about. As many of you know, I have never had more than 2 tarantulas at a time, and I've had only Spidey for most of that journey. So I do not believe that this is something that I struggle with, but it's something that I see a lot of other people struggle with. And for those of you who have been on this channel regularly, you know that in my day-to-day life, I am a mental health therapist. And so I do have a little bit of knowledge about how we might kind of figure that out. So the reason that I was inspired to make this is because I want to say, oh geez, a little while ago, I can't remember when, I did an interview for the Tarantula Collective, or actually the Exotic Pet Collective, with Richard Stewart from the Tarantula Collective. And we talked about a little bit about the addictive nature of tarantula keeping and mental health and things like that. And that recently popped up on my YouTube recommendations, and it reminded me that this is a really cool interview I did. Richard's such a good interviewer, and the work that he's doing in the tarantula hobby is so important. And so I was like, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. I think it's something that a lot of newcomers in the tarantula hobby are quite surprised by, in terms of the level of community around tarantula keeping and just how easy it is to go from one to some or many. Keeping a lot of tarantulas is not necessarily a problem unless it is starting to affect the other areas of your life. That's kind of how we separate whether something is an addiction or a disorder from, just a hobby that I'm really passionate about. The question to ask yourself is it a problem? Is it causing problems? So is your tarantula hobby or interest in tarantulas, tarantula keeping, buying tarantulas, getting so significant that you're struggling to pay bills, you're struggling to feed yourself, take care of your loved ones, or your other adult responsibilities? Is it affecting the way that you are able to maintain relationships or friendships? Can you maintain employment or your education if you're going to school? And any other responsibilities, such as taking care of your home. Is your home hygienic? Is it getting too overcrowded with spiders or tarantula stuff, so much that it's not functional anymore, or it's starting to be dysfunctional? Are you doing what we call activities of daily living? So for example, maintaining your hygiene, eating, sleeping normally, and taking care of your health. Are you getting movement or exercise? Are you active in a community, or do you have some relationships in your life? Those are all incredibly important, and these are all the things that kind of start to slide once we have some sort of issue in our life that's affecting our mental health. And now some of us, like people who do have addictions, there's a period of time where we're functional, right? And this is also the same for high functioning depression, things like that, where there may be a period of time where it seems kind of hidden, or it's not too obvious, or you're still able to do those things. However, the way that it's impacting you is actually causing distress. So maybe you are able to take care of yourself every day, but you're just kind of scraping by, and the way it feels is incredibly hard, so much harder than it used to be. So what I mean by that is, how does this impact your mental health? Even if, let's say, you are able to do all those things that I mentioned, that might start to slide if you're starting to have a problem. So what I mean by, does this feel like an exciting or calming hobby, or have we gotten so far in that it actually starts to feel very overwhelming? This is probably the distinction of when it starts to be an issue, and sometimes we're in too deep. I think a good example of this is somebody who gets a tarantula and gets into the community, gets so excited, starts making friends, starts going to expos, and starts following a lot of tarantula channels and things like that. And that's all, you're in the excitement phase, and it's awesome. You get deeper into it and you get a bunch of slings, right? Like maybe you go from 1 to 10 really quickly, and maybe that's fine for a few months, then you buy more. And now, maybe 3 years down the road, these slings are now full-grown tarantulas, and they need bigger enclosures. They need more food. They need more cleaning of those enclosures, and those enclosures are bigger now, so it's much harder. And maybe now you have 50 tarantulas. And some of us are just not, our lives just can't sustain that amount of care. And I know that a lot of people will say that, you know, there's not a big difference between taking care of 5 tarantulas versus, you know, 20 tarantulas, because you just have to feed them, you feed them all at once. But I am not really sure I understand how that doesn't take a significant amount of time and planning, supplies, as well as tracking. Like, do you have the mental ability or desire to track 30 different tarantulas, molts, feedings, tank changes, even the supplies in terms of substrate? Even if you only have to change the tarantulas enclosures maybe twice or 3 times a year, can you imagine buying substrate for like 50 tarantulas? I cannot. So yes, going back to my point, is this hobby now exciting and calming, or is it overwhelming? And I think that distinction is really important. It's going to be different for many of us. Some of us are going to find caring for multiple spiders incredibly meditative and calming. And maybe it's because we can actually dedicate a few hours to that task. For other, maybe you have a family or so many other responsibilities that, you know, taking 2 hours out of your day once a week to water and feed your spiders is just not feasible, and it actually causes more stress than joy. So I think it depends on a lot of different things. It's not just about the number of tarantulas. It's about, what is your life set up by? What are your capabilities in your life based on all the things you have going on? And what kind of bandwidth do you have mentally? I myself have never felt the urge to get a ton of tarantulas, because I know that I just don't have the bandwidth for multiples. I just don't have the urge to kind of put that on myself. I enjoy putting time into other things as well as tarantula keeping. For me to keep all those balls in the air, and this is just speaking about myself and the way I am made, I think that it would cause me more stress. I have a very emotionally demanding job as a therapist, and I like to keep my life pretty simple outside of that, because it is important that I can do good work and keep my stress levels relatively low when I can. And so a lot of times that means doing less. The other thing that I would think about in terms of trying to gauge, you know, how much of, you know, an addiction is this hobby to me, think about what the function of buying more tarantulas is for you. And I honestly say this in terms of when you're buying anything, the addiction to shopping is something that is alive and well. And for the tarantula hobby, there's just a lot more breeders and tarantula websites and people that are selling. So I think that with more options, you have more opportunities. And so you have to think about, like, why am I actually doing this? So some of us will try to fill a void in our lives, whether it's boredom, depression, not feeling good enough, feeling like we're in competition with others, which I think is sometimes really common in tarantula groups, unfortunately. Is it social status? I think that that's really important to make sure that your desire to acquire another pet is not being driven by those things. And is it now causing stress in your life when you actually do acquire that animal? You know, for example, are you isolating, withdrawing? How much money and energy is it taking from you, and can you afford to lose those resources of time, energy, and finances? I think that's really important when we think about even before we buy the tarantula or a pet. And can we handle the full extent of those responsibilities? Like I said, a tarantula, you know, sometimes we get it as a sling without even realizing that, in Spidey's case, this thing could live up to 30 years. Now, she's not 30 years old, but she's definitely a grandma. And so, I don't actually know her age, but female Grammostola roseus can live up to 30, so I'm gonna say she's probably pretty old. So that is a responsibility. You know, this is the same thing that we have to think about when we acquire things like cats or dogs. It's cute as a kitten or a puppy. However, this thing is gonna grow and it's gonna have demands and needs. Another thing I would encourage people to do is to pay attention to the roller coaster of emotions. A lot of tarantula owners get very excited during the research process, during the buying process, during the waiting process, to acquiring their animal and getting their animal delivered to them, or going to the expo to buy their tarantula. So that excitement will eventually wear off, right? As with any new purchase, or any new pet, as we get used to it, and as it just becomes a part of our lives. And when that excitement wears off, when you've had that tarantula for a while, how are you feeling? Are you still satisfied with this purchase? And so knowing that about yourself and how you might be once that, that big excitement wears off and you experience like this a dip towards normalcy. Are you somebody who can kind of look into the future and say, you know what, I actually do, knowing that I get a little bit excited and then I tend to get a little bit bored with a purchase. Can I see myself wanting this long term? Right, because it's just the most compassionate thing for the animal too, in terms of the stress that would happen with rehousing them to another person, perhaps not being motivated to keep up with its care anymore because it's not exciting anymore. So I think that these are all really important things to talk about. I will say on the other side, tarantulas have actually increased people's mental health and gotten them out of some very, very sticky places. Addiction to substances being one of them. I've heard multiple people say that they were saved by their pets or their tarantulas, whether it was a dog or in this case, tarantulas or spiders. Maybe checking on their tarantulas was the only thing that got them out of bed that morning. Taking care of their tarantulas relieved a lot of anxiety for them. I've heard multiple people say that if they got injured and they were depressed, having a tarantula at home with them that didn't necessarily take a ton of care from them, but was actually there with them and they enjoyed being with, was actually perhaps a life-saving thing. And so you really have to gauge what impact it's having on your mental health. It could be having a really wonderful impact on your mental health, but I do think that it is easy to kind of tip the scale into like, okay, I have gone too far, especially with a small pet like this where you could actually buy a ton of them relatively easy, especially when they're slings. And also that there is a large push in the community to acquire more. I think that that's something really interesting about tarantulas, the community. So yeah, let me know what you think about this. These are just kind of the things that we think about from a mental health perspective in terms of, has something actually become a problem for you in your life? And I think it could be useful for some of you or people that you know, just especially as you're getting into the hobby, to kind of think about it through this lens of like, maybe I go slow. Maybe I find what my limit is. Maybe I think about what's driving my purchases or my desire. Because at the end of the day, it really is about the care of these species and giving them a good life if we're going to take them out of their environments. And it is about spreading the love of this hobby and learning about these creatures. So anyway, let me know what you think and have a wonderful Tarantula Tuesday. I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.